Good evening. Happy New Year, everyone. I am so excited to be able to get back in the swing of things tonight and do my first Workstation Wednesday of the new year. So I hope that you're enjoying your winter break. And for those of you that have to go back to work tomorrow, I feel for you. I don't have to go back until Monday, so I'm still spending just a little bit of time being lazy, sleeping late, still eating junk food. I really need to eat a vegetable soon. For those of you that don't know, my name is Tracy King, and I'm known as the Bulletin Board Lady. I blog at mrskingrocks.blogspot.com. You can find me on Twitter as @TracyKing, and you can find me on Instagram as the Bulletin Board Lady. Obviously, you found me on Facebook if you're watching this, so be sure to like my page so you don't miss any updates or new products or exciting news. And the resources for what I'm talking about tonight are all found on the bulletinboardlady.com. And if you go there and you click other, there's a little drop down menu that says Workstation Wednesdays, and you can find not just the resources that I'm going to talk about tonight, but all of the live videos that I've done. I'll have all the resources there. My 2020 resolutions for Workstation Wednesday are to keep providing some information, some insight, maybe a few tips and tutorials each Wednesday. Sometimes that will be like it is tonight. It'll be a Facebook Live. Sometimes it will be a new blog post or a new product will be up, a new freebie. Sometimes a tutorial video needs something that I've recorded ahead of time and I'm just posting. So that's what I plan to do at least through the first part of May this year. So if you have some topics that you'd like for me to talk about, or maybe you have some questions, or you've seen a resource and you really just want to figure out what's going on with that, then you can let me know, and perhaps you'll see that in an episode that's coming up. So I hope, I always seem to get this all mixed up, but you are seeing me on the Bulletin Board Lady page, right? Somebody give a yes, that's where we are, Tracy. Sometimes I post this to my personal account, and occasionally I post it to one of the other accounts that I manage. I am the social media person for my school, and sometimes this ends up there and I have to, stop and delete and restart again back on my own page. Yes, because that's just the kind of classy gal that I am. So if you are seeing this on the Bulletin Board Lady page or through that page, just let me know so I don't worry for the next 10 or 15 minutes. So tonight we're going to talk about teaching instrument families, and this is something that I do every year intensively with my third graders. Now, of course, we talk about it in younger grades. Thanks, Jasper. And we really talk about it in 4th and 5th grade too. I mean, continually, but I really go in depth in 3rd grade because I want them to have the working knowledge and I want them to have the vocabulary, and I want to train their ear just a little bit to recognize some of these instruments. So we spend about 7 or 8 weeks mostly doing instrument families. We do some other activities. Of course, we're singing and we're moving in there too, but we're really diving in deep during those 8 weeks to learn about the instrument families. Now I'm going to talk more about my big plan of what we do with the instrument families as we go through January, because I'll be starting that with my kiddos then, and I'll be able to share some of the activities that I'm doing, some of the books that I use, the resources, and of course the workstations that I use, because I do different activities with each instrument family in a set of workstations and some STEAM projects. But tonight we're really just focusing on one resource and being able to use that same resource in several different ways. So that resource is my instrument family coloring sheets, and it's a pretty simple product. It groups instrument families together by their characteristics and throws 4 to 6 or 7 instruments on a page. Students have an opportunity to identify them and color them. And some of the sheets already have the instruments labeled, and you can of course use that in whatever way as a reference or for special learners that may need a scribe. This may help a step that's there. But we're going to dive into using these coloring sheets in several different ways, and I hope that that will inspire you to try them out in workstations. Or I don't always use this activity in workstations. Sometimes we'll do this as small groups or cooperative learning groups, but it applies itself to that small group kind of situation. So the first thing that you can do with the coloring sheets is, well, identify the instruments and color them. And I'm sorry, my saxophone is a weird color, but turns out I don't have a lot of crayons at home. So that's the first thing. Now, this is really what they were designed for. They were designed for the students to identify the instrument and to color it. Now, I have to admit, coloring instruments is pretty boring because they're, 3 or 4 different colors. So if they're coloring them realistically, that's kind of what that turns into. So to take that just a little bit farther, this year I have iPads in my room, which I'm really excited about. I have a class set, although this would work with Chromebooks too. Students can take that same sheet, so that same kind of coloring sheet, they can identify the instruments in that family, and then they can research and name 3 to 5 more parts of the instrument. Let me get that really close so it's terribly blurry and backwards. But you can see with the tuba, they've labeled the valves and the mouthpiece and the bell. So nothing really complicated. Again, depending on whether you're using this as a workstation rotation, where your time would be limited maybe to 8 to 10 minutes per group, or if you were doing this in small groups, then you might be able to have a little bit more time. Or the kids could work together. One could research tuba, one could research French horns, so however they could share their answers for that. But that's just going one step farther. Now, when I'm teaching instrument families, the first day that we talk about a family, we watch an instrumental classmates video, and I'll link to that in another episode. But that video introduces the instruments and how they make a sound, and it's by this kind of goofy guy that keeps, them kind of laughing with silly things through the whole video, which is great for keeping their attention. And then the next time we come in, we'll do something with that family, whether it's construct some kind of instrument like that, or maybe we'll make a straw reed. Sometimes we'll do these coloring sheets. We do word searches that helps a lot with spelling instruments. We might do other kinds of matching. This is a scrambled word and we match to an instrument and so on. So there's always another day where we do something, and this is a great time to do that and add just a little bit of research. Another activity that I've done with this is more of a follow-up at the end of the unit, is to have students research one instrument that they really liked, and then to pretend that this instrument is, alive and is going to a party where they have to introduce themselves. So, I've got some pretty clever introductions. One was a bass drum. And it was this tiny little girl that was trying to talk really, really low and say, "Hey, I got a low voice. I'm not sure if you've noticed, and I'm in the percussion family, and I'm kind of a big deal." And just kind of on and on like that, which helped them kind of connect with some of the characteristics of the instrument, but it was also a freaking hoot to watch in class. One of them was the French horn, which was just crazy funny. I'm not even gonna pretend to do a French accent. Actually, all I can do is laugh in French. You want to hear that? Oh, oh, oh. That was terrible. Oh, if only I could edit that out. Okay, anyway, so that's another activity that you could do. You could start with the worksheets, and then they could go and they could look for information about that, one of the instruments in that family, and they could write a short introduction. If you do have access to iPads or Chromebooks, they could, of course, record their introduction as though they were that person and either email it to you or save it into a class folder or something like that you would have access to it. There are also a lot of websites and apps and things things that you could use that would do the same kind of thing. And again, it's a clever way to get them engaged with learning instrument families. So another thing that you could do is that you could take that same worksheet that you have, and again, doing research either with technology, or you might have books that you would set in a workstation for them, or maybe even the resources that you have hanging around your room already, and you could have them find more instruments that would be in each of the families. So for this one, this is the string family. And although this is specifically more like instruments of the orchestra, there are other instruments that we would say are a member of the string family. And so on the back of that same worksheet, they could just list other instruments that they've either researched or they could see around the room, or you've listed around the room, or hanging on posters around the room, and they could write lists of other instruments that would be in there. I found that having these resources hanging in my room that they can copy from really helps improve their spelling. When we go back and we're doing a listening journal, and I want them to talk about tone color or timbre, I want them to tell me what they're hearing, a lot of them will make sure that they've turned around and they're looking under the right family to find the instrument that they think that they've heard in a listening piece. So that can be a great one. Another one is to say, so you've got this huge instrument family. The percussion one is a super easy one to do. And say, can this family be divided into smaller groups than just percussion? We know that that's already divided from all of the other instruments, but could you divide that down a little bit more? And of course, earlier than third grade, we've talked about shakers and strikers and scrapers. And so many of them would just use that basic one, but some of them get a little bit more creative and they'll say heads or headless, which sounds a little gruesome. But again, they're categorizing them. And when they're able to categorize them, they're able to look at the characteristics and make decisions about how they would make sound and what would be vibrating. And so I would accept that as well. You could do that with the woodwind family and do double reeds, single reeds, no reeds. That would be a good group to divide it into. There are others, but that's the idea is that you could add that as another way to use this resource. And that, of course, would really lend itself to workstation timing, because it wouldn't take a long time for them to figure out how to recategorize these instruments and just flip that over and write it on the back. Another way that you could do that is to take that instrument sheet, and after they had identified the instruments and colored them, or whatever it is that you would have them do some quick research on a famous musician that played one of those instruments and write a short paragraph. 4 to 5 sentences would be a nice solid paragraph that they could write about. Or if you wanted it to be even shorter than that, you could just have them make like a little bullet list of information about a musician that became famous playing that instrument that they chose. Now, I also like to add in STEAM elements to that when I can. And one of the things I've done was without supplies was to have students imagine that they had to build this instrument. Say they were going to build a saxophone, but they couldn't use any of the materials that the saxophone was already made of. So they couldn't use the metal that it was made of. They couldn't use wood for a reed. They would have to use other materials to create a saxophone-like instrument. So what instruments would they use, and what would their plan to be? So then I'd have them write out a plan, as usually it's incredibly vague. And then a supply list. What would they be using, and why would that be a good match? I also do a little STEAM add-on to the instrument unit by taking a water bottle and using it to make instruments from each of the 4 instrument families. Percussion would be shaking, brass would be blowing through or buzzing through the mouthpiece. Woodwind would be blowing across it like you would for flute or piccolo, and strings would be actually adding rubber bands and kind of manipulating it just a little bit to see how, what would the difference between thicker rubber bands and thinner rubber bands and how tightly the rubber bands were pulled and so on. So that's another element that you could add into that as well. So that's all using the same coloring sheets that are here, but just adding a little bit more onto them, taking it just a little bit of a step farther than the plain old worksheets that are there. So I hope that this has given you a little bit of inspiration about how to take a simple resource and use it in many different ways, or kind of extend the learning from just a basic lower level identify and color to something a little bit more complex. This also makes this resource usable for lots of grade level, even middle school, maybe even higher than that, depending on where you were gonna take it. Now, great news is that this resource is only a couple of bucks, and today and tomorrow it's on sale. So all of my store is on sale for 20%. So you can go and browse around, take a look at the other instruments of the orchestra workstations. You can put instrument families or just instruments in, or the link that's up above this video in the description will take you to some links, a blog post, a couple of files that you might be interested in, and then a link to my store and a link that says more instrument resources. And if you click on that, it's going to take you to a search on my store that has most of the instrument resources in it that you might find helpful. So thanks for joining me so much tonight. I hope that you have an amazing new semester, and I will see you again soon for Workstation Wednesday.